Hello, everyone. You have all tuned in to this educational session on the health impacts of using wireless technology. Please let me introduce myself. I'm Ellen Myers, the Programs and Communications Director from the Newton Free Library. I do hope that you and those you hold dear are well in these challenging times. I'd like to thank our co-sponsor, Green Newton, Newton's Massachusetts local environmental group, who has helped us get the word out about this program. I'd also like to mention that the Newton Free Library has a wealth of virtual programs for all ages, so please visit newtonfreelibrary.net for more information. A couple of housekeeping items. Everyone has been muted and you do not have the ability to unmute yourself during this meeting. Also, we have disabled the chat. We will open the chat box up during the question and answer session, and at the very end, we'll allow you to unmute yourself so we can all say goodbye to each other. For those who had a chance to watch the documentary Generation Zapped in advance of the session, that's great. If not, and you'd like to see it afterwards, it's available for viewing on Canopy if your local library subscribes to the service. And it is free if you're watching it through your local library service. Newton, Massachusetts residents with a Newton Library card can sign up for free or check to see if your local library subscribes to Canopy. That's K-A-N-O-P-Y. I wanted to mention that the chat box appears in different places depending on what type of device you're on, so you may have to poke around to find it. Also, this session will be recorded, so feel free to mute yourself as you wish. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Judy Safrier. She is a Harvard holistic adult and child psychiatrist and psychoanalyst with a private practice in Newton Center in Massachusetts. She's interested in raising consciousness about the relationship between environmental exposure and psychiatric symptoms. In working with her patients, she seeks to address root causes of illness rather than symptomatic suppression with pharmaceuticals. Welcome, Dr. Safrier.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for this discussion of the film Generation Zapped, and for an opportunity to learn more about how to use wireless technology more safely. First, I'd like to offer a big thank you to the creative Ellen Myers, Director of Library Programming and Communications, who was so instrumental in making it possible to hold this event online, since it could no longer be held in person. This event was funded by a grant from the Newton Cultural Council. The monies from the grant were also used to purchase a radiation detection meter that can be loaned out from the library. Cece will be telling you more about that. I first became aware of the health consequences of electromagnetic frequencies in 2015 when I read the excellent book Overpowered by the late Dr. Martin Blank. What I learned from that book caused me to begin to pay more attention to the health effects of the electrification of our planet, and I began to talk about wireless safety with my patients. But it was only after attending a conference in California last September for healthcare practitioners about this whole issue and learning more in terms of the urgency of the situation, that the reality that this is an issue that threatens all biological life on the planet really came into focus for me. It was at that conference that I met Cece, one of the conference organizers, for the first time, and learned that she also lived in Massachusetts. Shortly after returning back to Boston from that conference, an email arrived inviting submissions for grant proposals from the Newton Cultural Council. These grants are awarded in the area of the arts, humanities, or sciences for public benefit and enrichment. Cece and I collaborated and were awarded a grant to educate the citizens of Newton about the dangers of electromagnetic frequencies and about safer uses of our wireless devices. As Ellen mentioned when she introduced me, I am a holistic psychiatrist. I have a private practice with an office on the 3rd floor of my home in Newton Center, though these days I can only see patients via telemedicine. My approach is to help patients by identifying and treating the root cause of their illness rather than simply aiming to suppress symptoms with pharmaceuticals. Addressing root causes can take the form of acknowledging and transforming the lingering effects of growing up in a particular family, healing trauma, replacing biochemistry, rebalancing biochemistry with nutrients, as well as identifying and treating environmentally acquired illnesses like mold toxicity. My interventions with patients are holistic and are intended to support immunity, both biologically and psychospiritually. Many of the conversations I have with patients are about their emotional and spiritual lives, their diet, sleep, movement, and minimizing toxicity. Minimizing toxicity can mean eating an organic, non-GMO whole foods diet and using personal care and household products with natural ingredients, living in a mold-free environment, but also vitally important is decreasing exposure to electromagnetic frequencies. EMFs are particularly important for psychiatrists to know about because of their impact upon brain health. It is very common for EMFs to cause anxiety, depression, fatigue, as well as attention, concentration, and memory problems. In kids, exposure is often associated with learning and attentional issues, emotional dysregulation, behavioral problems, and anxiety. The impact of EMF upon sleep via the suppression of melatonin is particularly harmful. It is during sleep that so many healing processes take place, and when sleep is disturbed, health is undermined. Patients often feel much better when they use their technology more mindfully. The cells of our body are constantly whispering to each other. Exposure to EMFs interferes with this communication. There is a principle when it comes to EMF safety that the closer the device is to the body, the more it disrupts the body's own electromagnetic field. EMFs have a damaging impact upon the electrical chemical communication between cells. As you learn from watching Generation Zapped, exposure to EMFs are associated with a wide variety of serious medical problems, particularly in those who are electrohypersensitive who have more dramatic symptoms. Many patients who have chronic mysterious illnesses like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue feel much better when they limit their EMF exposure. But EMFs also have a damaging effect upon all of us by impacting our immune systems and creating systemic inflammation. There are a few simple things that I always recommend to my patients, such as turning off their routers at night, putting their phones on airplane mode in the bedroom, as well as when they are carrying them on their person. It's possible to download a podcast and then to listen to it with the phone on airplane mode rather than streaming it. I tell my patients to put their phones on airplane mode, put their phones on speakerphone and rest it on the table when taking a phone call, rather than placing it against their ear and brain, and to keep laptops off of their laps. This is the low-hanging fruit, some very simple changes that one can easily implement to mitigate against damaging radiation. With all of us in quarantine and using technology constantly to stay in touch with each other in the world, it is possible to create new, healthier habits which can make a substantial difference in our health without a great deal of effort. Supporting our immune system at this time of the pandemic is now more important than ever. It's now my pleasure to introduce Cece Doucette. Cece is a technology safety educator and co-founder of the international nonprofit Wireless Education. She has helped build quick, friendly online courses to bring our loved ones, schools, and offices up to speed on this issue. Cece will share her EMF journey plus exciting state and local initiatives to help transition us to safe technology. She will also show us just what safe technology looks like. Welcome, Cece.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Zafrir and Ellen. You guys have just done a remarkable job of pulling this event together, and I'm so grateful to be joining you today. So I'm going to switch us over to a shared screen, and we'll go through a PowerPoint slide for probably the next half hour or so. And then, as Ellen indicated, we will go ahead and open it up for chat, and Ellen will be our moderator, and she will help us answer some of the questions you may have when we're done here. Okay, so we'll see about making this presentation available to you after this program so that you can go in here and share this PowerPoint presentation with your own community. So anywhere in our presentation today where you see a link, you can then drill down for the scientific evidence and other facts behind each link. I'll introduce myself. We'll take another look at the fine print to make sure everybody knows how to find that in their own devices. We'll update you on the science because a lot has changed even since Generation Zapped was released. And then we'll talk about solutions at the personal level, at the community level, at the school level, at the state level, and other areas where we may wish to start thinking about how can we bring safe technology back into our world. And then we'll talk about next steps. And we'll wrap up with our Q&A. Okay, so I am a technical and professional writer by trade. And while we were raising our kids, I volunteered to help lead our local education foundation. And when I was doing that, we kept hearing about this 21st century classroom and how we were going to need to have all this great new technology in order for our children to succeed in the world. And our budgets in Ashland, Massachusetts had just been cut to the bone year after year after year. So we couldn't afford what we were hearing our kids would need to succeed. So a number of the parents, we jumped in, we started doing fundraising, we're doing grant writing, and we got wireless infrastructure. We got iPads and Chromebooks and smart TVs and smart boards and minis and all of this stuff that we were told was going to be important for our kids to do well in our world. So then one night at book group, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer had been reading something called Zapped. It's a book by Dr. Gittleman. And she mentioned to us just in passing at book group that there could be something up with wireless and health. And I went, huh. So I just made a mental note of it. And then not long after that, I read something that crossed my desk that there was something else, that it could indeed be biologically harmful. So that's where I began my journey. And you don't have to look very far even to find literally thousands of peer-reviewed scientific studies in credible journals that are showing this is biologically active, it's harmful, and it's especially harmful to children. So that's where I got started. And it was a very, very difficult conversation to bring up in my community. When I first started finding things, I just started sending them to my school committee, to our superintendent, to our school nurses, to our science teachers to say, hey, do you guys know about this? And I got back crickets, like literally nobody responded to me. And then ultimately our school committee chairwoman, who's very bright, she's a retired lawyer. She was raising 4 children in the school district. She started doing the deep dive, and we were passing information back and forth. Like, wow, did you see that the French National Library turned off wireless in 2008 because of the health risks? There were pockets of Israel and Belgium and Italy that we were finding that were removing these wireless exposures from the children. So, but she was only one voice on the school committee, right? Another one who had been our former chairwoman went and looked at the top lobbyists in our country. And if you look at the top 100 of all time, riddled throughout there is wireless, telecom, technology, utility companies. So she knew enough to say where there's lobbying power, there could be a conflict of interest. And then others, one gentleman on our school committee met me just coincidentally at the gas station one night, and I'm pumping my gas, and he says, so you turn your router off at night? And that was at the point where that's what I was doing. And I said, yeah. And he said, you know, I've been in technology my whole career and I have never heard any of this. And I said, well, the information's there. Please go out and do the deep dive on your own. And then there was another woman whose husband is an engineer. And in the engineering community, they've only been told that you have to have heat from a device that emits radio frequency in order to have harm. So she was satisfied that what she was hearing from her husband and the Federal Communications Commission was good enough. And then there was one member who was new, and she just recused herself because she had never been on school committee before. So what ultimately happened is when they read the legal fine print, they had an uh-oh moment because they knew they had given the children and the staff these wireless devices with no technology safety information. And so it was at that juncture that we became, unbeknownst to me at the time, but we became the first public school district in the United States to start taking precautions. And this is what resulted, was this little sign called Best Practices for Mobile Devices. And when I first saw that sign, it said Best Practices for Wi-Fi Safety. And then I worked for the schools at the time. And on the first day back, the teachers come in a day ahead of the kids, and you get all your mandatory training like anti-bullying, physical restraint, mandated reporter, you know, all of that. And then they put up a few slides on best practices for mobile technology. So I looked at it and it says good things like turn off these devices when you're not using them, turn on the Wi-Fi, you know, the routers only when you need them, always place the device on a solid surface, and keep your distance. You know, when I was a little girl, my mom would always say, stand back from the TV. And we knew enough at that time that that electromagnetic field coming off the screen of the television was even stronger than our own biological electromagnetic fields. I didn't know that's what she knew, or if she even knew that. We just knew not to stand close to the TV. And then they offered to show anybody at the school what the legal fine print says with the devices if they're questioning that. So what I want to do is make sure that anybody with us today who owns, say, an iPhone can see where that legal fine print is, because when you open this conversation with others, it's really hard for people to get their minds around it because we've only heard industry messaging. We haven't heard directly from the independent scientists who know the biological risks. So for anybody who has their iPhone with them today, I'd invite you to bring that out and then go into settings. And from settings, just remember the acronym GAL, like this gal in this program today taught you how to find the fine print. So when you're in settings, scroll down just a little ways and hit general. If it's an older phone, up at the top, hit about, and then scroll all the way down to legal. If it's a newer phone, you can skip about and just go from general to legal and regulatory. But once you get to that legal fine print, when you hit legal, there's a little short list of options. Down at the bottom, it says RF exposure, and that's radio frequency radiation or two-way microwave radiation that the industry politely calls energy. And when we take a close look at that, it says things like keep this device X amount of distance from your body, or you may exceed the FCC limits for public radiation exposure. And as we know from the film Generation Zapped, those radiation limits were never even safety tested. They were based on some old engineering theories that you have to have heat. They've completely ignored the peer-reviewed independent science that shows non-thermal effects. So the other important thing that tells us in there is to use a hands-free option, because as Dr. Safrir was saying, you want to create as much distance as you can if you're still using an active device. So otherwise, you're being exposed to 5 or 6 separate antennas now that are independently pulsing for a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router. There's a cell antenna, there's a data antenna, there's a Bluetooth antenna, there's a Wi-Fi antenna, there's a locator antenna, and there's a hotspot now because that is now being used to support their network. So, and how would we know? They just give us these devices and say, here, aren't they great? Have fun. So you get to learn and then decide what control you want to take over the exposures that you've been given. So on this journey, as I got further and further into looking at the peer-reviewed science, I kept thinking, surely somebody's got our backs on this. And it wasn't until 2015 when Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics put out this incredible report. It's free and it's online. And again, any of these links will get you to the information I'm presenting. Captured agency, how the FCC is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. This was my missing piece because I thought somebody else must surely be looking after us. But what captured agency tells us is this is basically the big tobacco playbook all over again, but on steroids, because at least with a cigarette or a pipe, you can smell it and choose to get out of the vicinity of this. We are dealing with a completely invisible toxin that is pretty much everywhere now, and we have no escape unless we make choices within the areas that we can control and then help to educate our communities, because by and large our municipalities don't know what's going on with this. So Fortunately, we have a lot of really good resources to help us today that I didn't have 7 or 8 years ago when we got started. This National Toxicology Program study is the largest study that the U.S. National Toxicology Program has ever done. It wound up being $30 million in the end, and it took them 2 decades. First, they went in and they used rodents, because what happens to these Sprague Dawley rats and another form of mice that they use happens biologically to our cells as well. So they went in expecting 2 decades ago to prove that this radio frequency was safe, because cell phones were the technology of the day. And so once they started doing the reporting on this, they did it by section. There were 4 sections. The very first section showed biological harm. And then once they got the rest of the studies completed, they did an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the U.S. National Toxicology Program, which is under the National Institutes of Health. Unprecedented 3-day peer review with experts from all over the world who came to testify, or Skyped or Zoomed in. And what they found was DNA damage, which is the roadmap to grow a proper human. They also found cancerous tumors in the lining of the heart. They found additional tumors in the brain, the adrenal gland, the thyroid, all these areas where we are seeing this happen epidemiologically in humans already today. So that U.S. National Toxicology Program was game-changing, because it concluded clear evidence, and clear evidence is the highest categorization of harm that they can identify. So this should have been front page news all over our world. But again, when we look at that captured agency report as part of the Big Tobacco Playbook, these powerful industries control very much of what we see through mainstream media. So just notice tonight when you turn on your television or you listen to your radio, whose ads are you hearing? That's where our information is coming from. So the infertility studies are actually what got me on my feet, because again, I couldn't believe what I was finding. I pulled up the infertility studies and they're all right out there. I've given you a link here where you can go read them for yourself. But they've taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas on, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure. And I went, you gotta be kidding me. We had just bought our then high school daughter a laptop for Christmas because she was going into high school. And here she is using it right on top of her reproductive organs. And I think even since Generation Zapped wrapped up, Kaiser Permanente has put out another very credible study that says women who are pregnant and using wireless technology are having higher miscarriage rates. And Dr. Hugh Taylor out of Yale's medical school, he runs their OBGYN program. He's done scientific research in his laboratory, and he has seen that when these pregnant mice are exposed to radio frequency during their pregnancy, the pups come out bouncing off the walls, just like children often present with ADD, ADHD symptoms. So very, very serious science here. Neurotoxicity, as Dr. Safrir alluded to, we know this is a neurotoxin. And when we look at our ever-increasing rates of ADD and ADHD, of autism, and of Alzheimer's, and a host of other PANDAS and other new terminology that we're having to learn when our children start falling apart. So that's what the long-term science is showing us. And as we learned in the film, and we were so grateful to have so many people who volunteered their time and had the courage to go on camera and say, yeah, this has made me sick. And we may even have some of those in our audience today. I know Patricia Burke has been just a incredible force here in Massachusetts. She has studied the smart meter issues. She's testified through our state and our local activities. And she was in the film. So Patricia, thank you for all the hard work that you've done with us. But here we go. So the industry will spin it as electro hypersensitivity, because if it's hypo or hyper, that becomes fringe. And so you don't really have to pay attention to it, right? But what they're not telling us is our own Americans with Disabilities Act has already recognized electrical sensitivities, because we are bioelectrical beings and we're all very individual. So you may not be impacted today, or you may never have stopped to think, well, gee, maybe some of these symptoms I do have are connected to this. And insomnia is a huge one. So many people don't sleep right anymore. But the great news is, as soon as you learn this, you've got a choice. Turn everything off for the next 3 nights and see what happens. I have people contact me all the time saying, oh my gosh, I got the best night's sleep I've ever had, like in decades. And all I did was turn off the wireless and all my devices. You can still use your cell phone as your alarm. It just doesn't need to be transmitting radiation all day and night. So insomnia is a big one that people, and headaches, these stabbing, searing headaches that their doctors can't identify. Get rid of the wireless and see what happens. Nosebleeds. So we had a lawsuit here in Massachusetts. It's a very, very prestigious international boarding school for children. And there was a little boy who wound up in the nurse's office time and again, and mom and dad would come get him, take him to the doctors. They'd run the test they knew to run, and nobody could figure out why he was having all these symptoms, the headaches, and his headaches ultimately came on with the nosebleeds too. And the fatigue, the pain, a lot of people get unidentified orientations of pain that their doctors can't figure out. Skin abnormalities, heating, flushing, rashes. There's a gentleman here in Framingham whose leg was going jiggity with the nerves in there, and his doctors couldn't figure out. He started doing his own research, and he figured out that's where he kept his cell phone all the time. He got rid of the cell phone on his leg, and the nerves in his thigh recovered. And then being a dad, he jumped all over this, and he hardwired his whole house so his kids are safe when they're in the home environment. Irregular heartbeats, too fast, too slow, depending on how your bioelectrical and chemical system is working. Cognitive impairment, as Dr. Safrir mentioned, people, they are realizing, I'm not thinking as clearly as I used to. I'm not putting things together as swiftly as I did before, and the memory issues. And then the anger and behavior issues. This is a neurotoxin. We have people behaving in ways that they would never choose to behave, but they may not be having full control over their own electrical impulses right now. And then, as Dr. Safrir mentioned, we are at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression in our society, not just with adults, but children, younger and younger children, whose central nervous systems are being jacked with microwave radiation 24/7, unless we learn a little bit and then we just fix it. So for a very long time, the industry would spin it that, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified in the scientific literature, so we don't have to pay attention to these scientists who are saying there might be a problem. Well, that would be like telling your child, go ahead and stick your hand in that fire on the stove, because we don't actually have a study that shows how the skin burns and melts, right? I mean, it's just a ridiculous statement that just because we don't know exactly how we have these mechanisms happening, we know they're happening. But now today, we do understand many of the mechanisms of harm very clearly. And Dr. Martin Pall has done a terrific service by gathering up the scientific literature reviews and outlining for us a number of ways that we know this is harming us. So Dr. Magda Havas up at Trent University, she's a professor emeritus from Trent University up in Canada, has done scientific experimentation that shows our red blood cells are meant to be free-floating individually, going to all these systems in our organism here and bringing oxygen through our blood to enable the right circuitry for all of our systems. What she sees under the microscope is when we're exposed to radiofrequency radiation, we have something called the Reuleaux Effect. And in my little mind, I just remembered that candy we used to eat, the Reuleaux that are stacked up. Well, this is what's happening to our red blood cells. because we have this electromagnetic force on them, they're magnetizing and they're stacking up like this roll of Reuleaux, right? So now you've got this long strand of thing that can't get to where it's meant to be free floating and oxygenating all of our organs. So now we have oxygen issues. And when we have oxygen issues, we get into pretty big trouble. Melatonin and sleep suppression. So when we talk about the insomnia or the stop-start sleep patterns that a lot of people have fallen into, we have something in the brain called the pineal gland. And the pineal gland in the wee hours of darkness is meant to release melatonin. Melatonin has a couple of really important jobs. One, it goes in and it regulates our circadian rhythm with our sleep. And two, it removes the toxins of the day. So even with just regular cell repair and regeneration, we have toxins in our body. We have toxic exposures from other environmental things. And melatonin helps to clean up our bodies while we sleep. So guess what? If we're not sleeping right, there's a whole downstream effect that happens. And we are, by and large, disabling our body's own mechanism for keeping us regulated. So getting your sleep on track is probably the first thing you want to do. Dr. Martin Paul and a Dr. Pal Patcher have done a lot of investigation to what's happening at the cellular level. So when we have this constant, erratic, spiked pulse of microwave radiation coming at us, it hits the cell wall and oftentimes can break that cell wall. And so now we have a dysregulation at something called the voltage-gated calcium channels, or those in the scientific community call them the VGCCs. But anyway, we're causing a leakage at the cell wall. That outside of the cell wall, there's a chemical reaction that now happens, and that produces a really nasty free radical called peroxynitrite. And as Dr. Safrir mentioned, we need to be mindful of what we're putting into our bodies on all levels. The food thing is another one. Get as organic as you possibly can, because Dr. Stephanie Seneff over at MIT, she's a senior research scientist. She's been looking at what is happening to our children, and she's been focusing on the food chemicals that are coming in. And although, you know, again, in big tobacco fashion, you do your own studies under conditions that will show no harm, like test one chemical in a half an hour or some short amount of time and see if it causes harm. And then if it doesn't, say, okay, it's safe, we're bringing it to market. Well, with things like glyphosate and Roundup, there are many chemicals in there that have these synergistic effects that do this whole downstream thing. And guess what? Those food chemicals are also causing peroxynitrite. So we need to be accountable for what we're doing with our bodies from both the electromagnetic fields and the other environmental toxins. So peroxynitrite, scientifically we know, will go to your weakest proclivity. Maybe it's your breast, maybe it's your brain, maybe it's your testes, maybe it's your gut. But we need to get ahead of this so that we can be whole and healthy in our own bodies. So as they show, Dr. Erica Mallory Blythe in the film Generation Zapped talked about the blood-brain barrier, which is a film or a membrane that we have in our body. We've got them in the gut as well, that protect these sensitive areas like our neurological content from getting exposed to toxins. So remember, we talked about melatonin helping to escort the toxins out of the body through the blood. That all used to be well and good, but now this radiation is opening up the blood-brain barrier. So instead of taking the toxins out of the body, they can now take a left turn and go into these sensitive areas in our brains. And so we have these new diseases that we've never had before. So let's step back from wireless and learn to use our technology safely. As we're seeing with this pandemic that has us joined together by a computer instead of being together in a room, we know scientifically that radio frequency radiation causes cells to grow more rapidly. And in a controlled medical setting, that can be an amazing tool for healing. We can stimulate stem cell growth. We can stimulate bone cell growth. But what are we doing in this ubiquitous way that we have now just swamped our entire community with radio frequency radiation. So with the physicians on the front line with COVID-19, we know this is hitting the immune system especially hard. We know that our physicians are seeing these cell growths much more rapidly than what they would normally expect. And just last week, I was doing a program with Dr. Patricia Hopkins out of Weymouth here in Massachusetts. She asked me to come on. And one of the participants put in a chat question about the blue COVID toes. I hadn't heard about COVID toes yet. Well, that's where the blood is not circulating properly. And so some people and children are experiencing their toes turning blue. So we need to get serious about this, and we need to get serious about it fast, because all the while this pandemic is happening, the industry is still forcing 5G small cell antennas in at the curb outside of our homes if we don't get on it and start educating our towns about this. And we're going to share some excellent resources for you to do that. So these are all ways that we now know scientifically that radio frequency radiation harms our cells. So we don't need more science. We should have invoked the precautionary principle long ago. So any industry person or anybody who just simply has not had a chance to look at the real science, when they say, oh, you know, there's no harm, we can say, here, take a look at this and take it, you know, see what you think, and then come back and let's talk about it. So in addition to us, every biological creature is also impacted. So our pollinators and our birds, for example, they have this symbiotic relationship with the electromagnetic field from the earth. And that helps them to navigate where they're going. They have their own navigation systems that are meant to be synchronized with the earth. But guess what? Now we've introduced this whole layer of electrosmog that's right in their environment. So we've seen the bee collapse, the bee colony collapse. We know the neonicotinoids play a part in that, but we also have science showing that the radio frequency is causing the bees to be able, or to not be able to get back to their hives in certain cases. We also know that the birds, when they started testing 5G in The Hague in the Netherlands, they had hundreds of birds literally drop dead out of the sky. So we can't exist without our little friends, right? Our birds, our pollinators, the bird seed comes out their fecal matter. We need that on our planet. We need the pollinators who are taking care of our plants to make our world healthy for us. In addition to what we're doing to our critters, we need to really come to understand the energy consumption end of this. So we're given these devices with no information on how that device got to us. There is so much going on in countries, murder rates higher than anywhere else in the world for people who are being made to go out and mine the precious minerals that we need to have in all of our wireless technology. So if anybody saw the film with Leonardo DiCaprio called Blood Diamond, that will give you a good idea of the horrors that are going on to get the minerals that go into our devices that the industry says, hey, get rid of that one, take this one, it's newer and better. We should never get rid of something until we've fully used its useful life, because what we're doing to get those devices on the starting end of it is horrific. Once they're mined, the water consumption that's being taken to wash these minerals down in communities where children and families don't have enough water to keep themselves alive. So there's a whole dark side of this that the public simply has not been given information on. And then once we have a wireless system up and running, the amount of energy that's being used by the data warehouses, the wireless networks, and what we're using to continuously charge all of these personal devices that we might not even be using all the time, but we're charging it up, we gotta have it. 80% of the energy is consumed before we even get our devices. 20% is the useful life in our own devices. But there is a Greenpeace analyst who looked at the data and looked at the numbers and said, if the wireless industry were a country, it would be the 5th or 6th largest energy consumer in the world. And I don't know about you, but I really care about our planet. And I don't want to be a part of that if I can help it. So I've made personal choices in my space. I have all the technology that I need, but I'm doing my best to reduce as much of the energy consumption as I can. So think about what we do. Streaming, do we have to do it on a wireless device? No. As Dr. Safrir identified, download things, put your device in airplane mode, and then just enjoy the content that you have on a safe device. Every time we send and receive, we are using data, we are using energy, whether it's just to send a little smiley face or to send really important information. We need to retrain ourselves to not let our wireless environment be our playground. Charging, as I mentioned, and now they've got wireless chargers, great. And then in the background, when we have our antennas on, all these updates are going on behind the scenes, back and forth. But once we know, turn everything off. And then for a minute or two, turn it back on, let it do its upload, download, and then put it right back in airplane mode. And you will have saved a substantial amount of energy. Okay. And I know, when we were at that conference together with Dr. Safrir, our host got up there at one point because our medical doctors are having to learn about all this too. And they got up to the podium and said, okay, folks, we realize this is like trying to get a drink of water out of a fire hose. So we know it's a lot of information to take on. But once you know, you're halfway there, right? Once you know, then you're empowered. And you just have to say, okay, so what can I do? What baby steps can I take today that might make me and my loved ones a little bit safer? So let's look at what that might look like. When you're not using them, turn all your devices off. Some people are very, very obligated to feel like they have to have that device with them all the time. Well, you know what? It's kind of cool when you turn it off, because then you look around and go, hey, wow, I could be doing this or that instead of just being in front of a screen. If you can't have it off and you do need to access some applications on there, use it as much as possible in airplane mode. And again, sometimes on a device, if you just hit airplane mode, that will disable all the antennas. But I've heard with some of the Apple products, if you changed any of the settings, it might turn some of those antennas back on, or they might be doing updates in the background that will turn it on. So just take a quick look. Do I have my cellular antenna off? Do I have the data antenna off? Do I have the Wi-Fi off? How about that Bluetooth? And then the hotspot that they've now put on our devices. And then here's another thing that's like big tobacco. What are we doing with our secondhand radiation? Are we using it in front of children who are a very vulnerable subpopulation? Are we using it around fetuses or the elderly whose, systems are naturally declining, and so they get hit harder by this radiation? And then are we using our devices near anybody who already has an identified health compromise, because their systems are already fighting things, and when we add this radiation on top of it, then that's not a very healthy, safe environment. And then our pets too. Are we locking our poor little dog in the same room with the router? Are we leaving our devices on all night long, where our poor little friends, our furry friends, need to be getting their cell repair and regeneration at night? So we need to start broadening our awareness of what we're doing and how that's impacting not only ourselves, but everybody around us. So what does safe technology look like? It's not rocket science, right? And they did a lovely job of showing us some of those options in Generation Zapped. So the end result is we should only be choosing hardwired technology where we have control over that. And that just means in your house somewhere right now, the internet comes into your home and it hooks into a box. It could be a router or a modem router. Go down and look at that box. And that's what this little thing on the left in the graphic is that Ethernet jack is in the back of that box. This one has 4 jacks in it, so you could feasibly directly plug 4 separate devices into there and hardwire 4 devices right off the bat, right? Then you just hook up your device with an Ethernet cable, and notice the word shielded there. So there's dirty electricity that comes off the wiring unless you choose a wire that is shielded. And all that means is it's wrapped in foil on the inside. And so most internet cables in the upper versions, you know, Cat 5, Cat 6, Cat 7, Cat 8, look at it though, it'll either say foil or shielded on it, and that's what you want to get. I had an old box of them, of Cat 5s from way back before we had wireless, and I thought, okay, I'll just plug these in. And then when I looked at the stamp that's on the wire, they weren't shielded, and so I want to do the best by my family, and I just replaced them with shielded cables. And then an Ethernet switch is this little box right here in the middle. And that just allows you to plug multiple devices in at once, right? So that's easy. And then from that little switch, you just put shorter cables. And then, so people will go, oh my gosh, my cell phone doesn't have an Ethernet jack in it. Oh no, my iPad or my Chromebook doesn't have an Ethernet jack. Do I just have to sit here with the radiation? The answer is no. Just get an adapter. You can buy an adapter for short money online and then just plug it right into your device and go in and turn off the antennas. So here's a closer look at that. So the router, you probably are already paying for that through your internet service provider. I know when we looked at our bill from Comcast or Verizon or whoever we're using at the time, there was like a $10 rental fee on there, because we're apparently renting the device that they put in our house. And so we had decided, my husband had decided that we could get a better deal on our internet service provider, and we had Verizon at the time. And when I first learned about this issue, I circled my tail for a few months because I didn't want to believe any of this was true. But the more I researched, the more I thought, I've got to protect our kids and ourselves. So I hardwired everything in my home, and then I went down to the basement where our router was, and I have a device that allows me to measure the radio frequency, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And even though I had chosen to hardwire everything, there was still this huge radiation emission coming off of that router. So I called up Verizon and I said, I'm choosing hardwiring. Can you teach me how I can disable that? And he said, sure. Sit down at your computer. I said, really? I could do it right from my computer? And he said, yeah. So he walked me through how to get into my online account. And then there was something that said wireless settings. And I clicked on that, and it showed there was a 2.4 gigahertz antenna in there, and there was a 5 gigahertz antenna. And so that 5 gigahertz antenna is not the same as 5G. 5 gigahertz means the speed and the wavelength that you're getting from that signal. 5G is 5th generation technology. That's just the next level up from what our cell phones are running off of now, which is 4G and 3G. So he showed me how to get into the computer, into my account. I just went off on each of those antennas, and it gave me a message saying, you realize you're cutting everybody's Wi-Fi off? I said, yes, thank you very much. And then after a minute or two, I took my device back down to the basement and I measured, and it was radio silence. No radiation. So then my husband sees that Comcast is going to offer us a better deal. And I said, okay, you know, he's a finance guy. So, you know, his world makes sense in terms of dollars and cents. So Steve goes and contacts Comcast and says, you know, we would like to take you up on that new deal, but my wife wants to be really sure there's going to be no radio frequency when you switch our equipment out. And so he said, oh yeah, no problem. You know, we're good with that. So the tech guy shows up at our house. He replaces all the boxes. And then I take my acoustimeter down to the basement and I turn it on. I said, just humor me before you take off for the day. And we turn on my meter and it goes off the charts into the red zone. And I said, okay, so you got the 2.4 gigahertz antenna, right? You know, I'm talking like I know what I'm saying. I'm not an engineer, but I know enough to know there's a 2.4 gigahertz antenna in there. He said, yeah, I turned it off. And I said, what about the 5 gigahertz? And he said, yeah, I turned it off. And I said, and somebody told me that Comcast is now using our home router and our energy, by the way, to put hotspots in that box to throw signal all the way out to the curb so that anybody driving by can have a continuous signal. And I said, did you turn off the 2.4 gigahertz hotspot? And he said, yeah. I said, what about the 5 gigahertz hotspot? And he said, yeah. He said, I turned all 4 of those antennas off. And I said, so why is this device still going off the charts? And he said, I don't know. So he fidgets around. We're still measuring, still off the charts. He calls his tech support. They don't know. He calls his supervisor. His supervisor doesn't know. And I'm thinking, well, this is not good. So he leaves and he says, I'm bringing my manager back with me tomorrow. And I said, great, thanks. Well, meanwhile, I have a colleague in Silicon Valley now. And I remembered, I was kind of on the fringe of a conversation I heard him having one time. And he was talking about a fifth antenna that was in there. So I reached out to him, I emailed him, and I said, hey, what was that other antenna that was in there? And he said, oh, it's the home security system. Whether you have a wireless home security system or not, they've got it turned on in case you decide ever to safeguard your home with a wireless home security system. I went, oh, and then he said, and the frontline tech support has never been trained on this. So you have to ask for a tier two tech support person. And that by and large will probably get you to an engineer who can then go into your account and turn off that extra antenna. And I'm like, well, that's crazy. I said, I'm not playing that game because I know that updates happen in the middle of the night and I don't want to risk that they're going to turn this thing on and I'm not going to know about it. So my husband was very sweet. He went out that night and humored me, and it's not easy to have these conversations at home when you figure this out because by and large, most people don't want to know that this issue even exists. So my poor husband was one of those, but over time with some education and being able to show the safety factors, he went out and we bought our own router. So I think ours is like a Netgear router, but the important function that we looked at is it has a switch on the front that we can control the radiation. We have a button to turn off the Wi-Fi. So the next day when the Comcast guy and his boss showed up, I told them what I had learned and it was news to them. And I said, as a show of good faith for all of this, would you be so kind as to just hook this router for us up? And so they did, which was really nice. We could have figured it out ourselves, but they were great to work with. They didn't know. So from that router in our basement, we have run a really long cable into our living room. And that, you can get 100-foot cable, you can get 200-foot cable, you can get 50-foot cable for like $30. And then I just bought one of these little Ethernet switch boxes for like 20 bucks online. So you plug the long one into it, and now you can plug in all your devices. So there's a short cable there for the phone with a little adapter, and then it goes right into the phone. And once you plug it in, you just go into the device and turn off the antenna. So, my poor kids, I had to be that mom that figured this out, right? And when you're 15, you just want to be exactly like your peers because every cell in your body is changing every day. And you don't want to call attention yourself. So I have to be that mom that brings home this new thing to try and safeguard her kids. So I figure out the adapter for the iPhone, the RJ45 Ethernet LAN adapter. And on the previous screen, if you go to that link, we've got a blog that has some information on how to hardwire. So I hand this adapter to my daughter and I say, plug it into the Ethernet cable. She rolls her eyes at me for a minute. I say, come on. So she plugs it in. I say, now turn off your antennas and do something. So she does. And she goes, oh my gosh, Mom, it's so much faster. And I said, yeah, because any signal you get through a wire is going to be way faster than anything you get with wireless. Because wireless is pretty crummy technology, if we're honest with ourselves. You don't get a very reliable signal all the time. Your data is out there flying through the air. Anybody with a $100 application can hack in and snag your data. So it's much safer. It's much more sustainable to use hardwired technology because the industry keeps telling us we have to replace everything every couple of years. Once you're hardwired, you're solid. But with my daughter, I could see the wheels turning in her head. She says, okay, Mom, so if I'm running all my signal, all my data through the cable in the adapter, and I've turned off all those antennas, does that mean now that it's not eating into my data plan? And I said, that's right. Because if she goes over budget, we want to teach her responsible finances. So if she goes over budget, we make her pay out of pocket to cover the overage. So she was really excited that she's not going to have to hand Daddy, $15 every month now. So that was one way to get our teenager engaged in this. And then when she went off to college, her sophomore year, she had her own apartment. And she had damaged her cell phone somehow, and they sent her the replacement because she had bought the insurance for it. But they sent it here to the house in Massachusetts instead of to her school address in Delaware. So she's, Mom, when that box shows up, will you forward it on to me? And I said, sure, under one condition. You know, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I can do a little mommy blackmail here. And so I said, I will send you that phone if you promise me you're going to hardwire it. And my husband's elbowing me, you know, going, that's mean. And I said, sweetie, you know, she's a kid. She's a vulnerable subpopulation. So I said, I'll send you your phone if you promise to hardwire. So I went online. I got her a long cable. I got her a little switch box. I got her a couple short cables and adapters. And I sent her a care package, not the typical care package a college kid receives, but I threw some chocolate in there too. And so I said, okay, sweetie, once you get this, go ahead and send me a picture of how it looks when it's all hooked up. And I sent her a roll of gaffer's tape, which is what, you know, they use on movie sets. It's just a cheap roll of tape to make sure you don't have cords that are going to trip somebody. So she did me one better. She hooked it all up. She said it wasn't even hard to do. And then she videotaped from the router in her living room where she hooked up the long cable. She showed me how she taped it down through her living room, in through her kitchen, down the hallway, and into her bedroom, where she had hooked up the little Ethernet switch box and the two short cables. One was plugged into the cell phone. I did send it down to her. One was plugged into the cell phone and one was plugged into her MacBook. And now I know that even though there's a cell tower at the end of her block, that at least within her controllable space, she has a safe sanctuary. So again, you know, if you add up the dollars on this, for like $100, you can have safe technology. It's not rocket science and it's not that hard to do. And then, so what I do in my home, when I first was circling my tail on this, I'm like, man, we paid good money for all those DECT cordless phones. I didn't even know what DECT stood for. It's digital, electronic, cordless telephone. Anytime you've got that digital signal on a wireless device, that's where you know you're getting exposure. So I kept looking at those going, man, I can't just throw away perfectly good equipment. Maybe I'll donate it to our local family services organization. But then I was like, in all good consciousness, I can't even give somebody this. So I just pulled out the batteries and recycled those. And then I just threw the DECT cordless phones away. And I went online to Staples and I got this phone. And now I've got 4 or 5 of these around our house. It cost me like 20 or 30 bucks for phone. It's got nice big buttons. It's got a speaker capability. So when I'm doing a work call, I can still be on my computer and carry on the phone. So again, yeah, it's not as swift and sleek as a mobile device that lets you move all over your house, but you know, look around your house. You might even already have Ethernet jacks. I've always had one in my home office here because you get a much better signal through an Ethernet cable. So my main PC has always been hardwired. I have a laptop that I take with me if I'm traveling, or if I need a break from here, I'll plug it in my living room and I'll do Zoom calls and Skypes with family and friends in there. So again, it's not rocket science, but it is really important, especially in a time when we have immune suppression going on right now. So do yourself a favor, start making these baby steps and get to safe technology. But again, just plugging it in doesn't make you safe. You have to turn off every one of those antennas. And then measure, because it's invisible. And now that the industry is bent on 5G and the Internet of Things, that means they want to put one of these radiation transmitters in every single device. So we see products coming out now like the iPotty. Put your little pumpkin toddler on a potty chair to toilet train, and in front of them put the iPad or your cell phone so they can be entertained while they're learning their toilet training. They're putting a device that you can clip on to a baby's diaper that then sends data to your cell phone so you know if your baby has soiled itself. I mean, come on, pick up the kid and sniff the diaper like we always did. So we've kind of lost our minds. But now that we know that it's very harmful, and especially to children, why would we ever use a wireless baby monitor, right? Convenient, sure, you can hear the child, but babies have been screaming for time eternal If the baby needs you, you will hear it and you will go in and you will pick up and love and reassure your child. So if you can still get a hold of some cordless or some corded baby monitors, that's definitely the way to go. But you definitely do not want to be setting a wireless baby monitor next to your child where their DNA is still forming. So again, measuring is about the only way you know whether you have exposures and whether you've gotten them all. Case in point, my other daughter, when she was home from college, needed to print something and said, Mom, can I just turn on the wireless real quick to print? And I said, sure, just be sure and turn it off. And she did, to the best of her knowledge. But that next day at work here in my office, you know, I had to clean up my own health. I was diagnosed with leaky gut syndrome. So that was my journey to learn about eating clean, healthy, organic food. So I'd had a great, healthy breakfast. I'd slept well the night before. And then within about 2 hours of sitting here in my office, I just felt like the earth was sucking me down again. And I'm like, well, what is it? So I turned on my meter and it went off the charts. It was back in the red zone. And I was like, well, what the heck? And I looked, and when I turned on my meter, it was, so right now this is popping around in the green and a little bit of yellow. I get some bleed through from my neighbors. But it was in the red zone again. And I'm like, well, where is it coming from? And it was my printer. Well, it turns out, and I was like, but the little light's not on the front that glows when the wireless is on. I'm like, how can that be? So I just pulled up the manual online, and it turns out that printer now has 3 antennas in it. Some Bluetooth thing, some Wi-Fi hotspot, and then the regular Wi-Fi. So all I had to do was go into the printer setting and go off, off, off. And then I had safe technology again. And you know, my printer's always been hooked directly to my CPU for my hardwired connection. So, you know, even though you have a wireless printer, you probably don't need to have the wireless capability. And again, signals are much more reliable and fast through a cable. So it was such a pleasure to work with Dr. Zafrir on this grant that she mentioned. And, you know, check around in your communities. Are there funds that are available for community-based projects? And I think I was probably the first in the nation to do this. And the way that I figured out that even going to a library and trying to get a grant to put a device in is a thing, back when the energy industry decided they were going to take away our incandescent light bulbs and replace them with those swirly CFL, those fluorescent things, which by the way threw off a whole nother form of very unhealthy, dirty electricity. Part of their marketing strategy was to go to every one of our libraries here and offer up this device. It's a kilowatt meter. And their thinking was, let the public take this device out from the library, go home, measure your current light bulbs, the old-fashioned incandescent bulbs, measure how much energy that uses, and then screw in one of these new bulbs and see how much money you're going to save by using this new technology. So, and again, I'm all for energy conservation, but we have to find that balance between health and energy conservation. So I knew our library had a meter on loan, and I thought, well, let's just get a meter that measures radio frequency, and then the public can just borrow it, go home, get the data on what their exposures are, and then have the information on how to get to safe technology. So in my mind, that sounded pretty simple, right? Problem, solution, how do we get there? So I went to my town. We have a grant fund here because the Boston Marathon runs through our town, and we get runners' bibs, and people in the community take those out and do fundraising for the marathon. And then that money goes back out to be distributed through our select board. So I thought, cool, let's ask for a meter for our schools and a meter for our town. And so I submit my application. And then they reject my application. And they said, we're not really sure about what this technology is. So they rejected it. They said, come back next time. So I come back next time. I resubmit my application. And then they say, oh, gee, this is probably more of a Board of Health issue. So they lobbed it over to the Board of Health. Well, I'd already met with our health agent here in Ashland, and he didn't know about wireless, but he did know about the cell towers when the industry was first forcing those into our towns. And he said, we don't have any control. And I went, what do you mean? And he said, we were told at the municipal level that we have to adhere to the state has to adhere to the federal, and the federal rolls up to the Telecom Act of 1996. And Dr. George Carlo talked about that in the film Generation Zapped. So basically the industry came in, they wined and dined our municipal leaders, took them out to fancy hotels for fancy dinners and said, here's this great new technology. And oh, by the way, if anybody has considerations about environmental impact, well, there's a law here now that says there's no recourse. So basically the industry, through their lobbying power, wrote Section 704 of the Telecom Act that says, if there's a harm to the environment, there's no legal recourse, you can't sue us. And they've since come to say that that environmental impact includes health. So that's all our town knew, right? So I'm thinking, well, how do we get the public informed? So by then I went and met with my senator, Karen Spilka, with whom I'd had the privilege of serving on our local education foundation. And we both had, you know, a nice, healthy respect and regard for one another. So I met her at her local office hours. And I said, Senator Spilka, look at what this science is telling us. Look at what Ashland's done. We've become the first in the nation to even have this sign hanging. And let me measure your cell phone and your district director's laptop. So I measured Senator Spilka's cell phone and it went right off the charts. I measured her district director's laptop. That went right off the charts. And they're both looking at me like deer in the headlights, like, really? And I said, yes, and nobody knows. I said, is there anything from where you sit that we could at least give the public the right to know? You know, it's right to know, like tobacco or alcohol or drugs or gambling or pornography. Adults will make their choices, but everybody deserves the right to know that this is a biological toxin. So she and a lawyer in her office, she put me with a lawyer in her office, and we crafted a really simple bill that says, get the right minds at the table, get the legislators, get, you know, the Department of Health, get the Department of Education, get environmental specialist healthcare providers at the table. Let's figure this out and start protecting the public. So right around that time, my bill came up for public hearing, and I testified in front of the Joint Committee on Public Health. And here in Massachusetts, you only get 3 minutes to testify. And I'm thinking, well, that's not a very long time. So I'm holding up the science. I'm holding up our little sign in Ashland. I'm holding up the meters that show you can measure this. And I'm watching the faces of this entire Joint Committee on Public Health. And I could tell that not one person on that panel understood that this is an issue. So I thought, wow, 3 minutes isn't going to cut it. So I made it a priority to get in there and meet with everybody on this committee over the next 6 to 9 months. And my bill was actually reported out favorably by that committee that first time the bill was introduced. So when I saw that they had not understood this issue, and after I started meeting with them one-on-one, I'm like, oh, I better double back to my town. So then I requested meetings with our selectmen, our select board. One came to my house. Her daughters and my daughters grew up together. So, you know, we're a small town. She came to the house. I showed her what the measurements looked like. And then I met another one in a coffee shop. I met another one in a new establishment that just opened up here. And he was a retired police officer. And he said, Cece, you had me at hello. Because when you talk to our public servants, the fire, the police, they have known for a very long time that this is extraordinarily harmful because they've lost their brethren from the radar guns at the back of the car, brain tumors, cancerous tumors in the lap from where they've held those radar guns. So once I got in and educated everybody one by one, they approved my application to put the acoustometer on loan in the public library. I had to go present to the library trustees as well, but in the end, we became the first in the nation to have one of these devices on loan. And so once I connected with Dr. Zafrir and we knew she had a pot of money in her town through their cultural council, it was really easy to go back and just rewrite that grant. So if anybody wants to do that in your town, we already have a grant application written. You can take it and run with it, customize it for your town. But that, the meter that I got in Ashland, because it came out of Our own town funds is only available to Ashland residents. But I'm so grateful to know from Ellen Myers that the acoustometer in the Newton Library is available to anybody in the network in Massachusetts. Anybody in the Minuteman network can borrow that acoustometer, and I think it's for up to a week. So share it with others when you have it and do the best that you can. And for some people, it's no big deal to go get some cables and to plug stuff in. For others, it's terrifying. So if you're in the latter category, just know there are professionals. There's an entire profession of building biologists who are trained experts in what does it take to have a healthy built environment, from the mold to the VOCs, and also there are those who are certified with the EMFs or the electromagnetic field. So don't feel like you have to do it on your own if you're not a do-it-yourselfer. You can click on that link or go out to the Institute for Building Biology, and there's a directory where you can find help. Okay, so how do we take care of our mental health? Now it's becoming obvious. Avoid excessive screen time. We don't need to be on our screens all the time. That little poster there I have next to my computer, 50 ways to take a break. Print that out, remind yourself, get outside, go play with other people when you can, go meditate, go write a story, pick up an instrument, you know, all these things. Go climb a tree, go sit on a rock in the woods, go take a swim, go take a nap, listen to some music. All these things that are restorative to ourselves and fun, right? So model good behavior, set limits for yourself and your children, and those 50 ways to take a break. I was so honored. On this journey, I had heard about earthing or grounding, and there's a lot of science behind it, that every living thing is meant to be connected to the earth, because through that physiological connection, we get electrons that come up from the earth, and they help to regulate our own bioelectrical chemical systems, right? But look at us, we walk around in rubber-soled shoes. The electrons can't get up through those. Through leather they can, but a lot of leather shoes even have a metal plate that will again block that healthy benefit from the earth. So connect to the earth as best you can. And I live in New England, and I'm thinking, well, that's not very practical because we have frozen ground and snow for like 6 months out of the year in a tough year. So this Dr. Laura Conover has written a new book that was just released, and it's called The Earth Prescription, and we've crossed paths on this EMF journey. And I was just so tickled when she reached out to me and said, hey, will you read my manuscript, and if you like it, give it a recommendation? I said, sure. And I was so thrilled because she's taken earthing through every one of our 4 seasons and just gives dozens of ways to connect to the earth without even having to take your shoes off. Like now when I go out for a walk, I wear fingerless gloves in the winter, and just by touching the pine needles or the leaves or anything that has a wire content that's in the ground, I immediately ground. I immediately get that healing benefit. If you have a furry friend that's on the grass, just rub their little ears or their snout, and that immediately grounds you. You want to go for the high water content areas because the fur and the bark on the tree, that's insulating the energy inside the critter or the grown nature thing. So this is a great book, The Earth Prescription, if anybody wants to look at that. Our healthcare teams, by and large, have not been trained on this. That conference that I met Judy at was the first large-scale international conference that we've held here in the United States. And we flew in experts from all over Europe. We had people come in from Canada and experts all across the US. Medical doctors, the scientists, we had building biologists who presented. All that content is available online right now for anybody to get. And again, we would like to make everything free for everybody, but we've all taken major time from our own careers to do this. And then you need seed money to make these things happen. So we volunteered our time, and somebody gave us the seed money, but you have to pay that seed money back. So those EMF conference videos are available. I think it's $295. You can tell your doctors, nurses, alternative healers, first responders, that training is now available for everybody. And there's another conference that's coming up in 2021 in January where they can also get the CMEs or the continuing medical education credits. People who attended in person back in September were eligible for 15 CMEs level 1 because you were there. This next conference will also have the do-it-yourself training credits available for continuing education. So we're just so grateful because this was another one of the missing pieces. How can our doctors learn this in a credible, safe way? And now it's there. Dr. Victoria Dunkley was featured in the film Generation Zapped, and she talked about the impact that this is having on our kids. She wrote this book, Reset Your Child's Brain, and she has a 4-week protocol to get your kids back. And so, for example, if your child is using an electronic device, and you say, okay, sweetie, you've got 5 minutes left, whatever, and then you go to disengage them from that device, and they lose it, and they throw a fit, or they get angry, or they're turning into angry little children, you may very well be having digital addiction happening right under your nose and not just thinking, oh, those rascally kids. We know scientifically this hits the same receptors in the brains as drugs, alcohol, pornography, gambling, tobacco. So when people say, oh, I'm so addicted to my phone, watch out, because it is physiologically addictive, in addition to the excessive screen time. So thank goodness for Dr. Dunkley's book, Reset Your Child's Brain. I had the privilege of going to a seminar with Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair. She's actually out of Newton, Massachusetts. And she wrote a book called The Big Disconnect, which takes every stage of childhood development and talks about what this impact is doing. Our kids are no longer outside playing under the rhododendron, getting into these deeper and deeper levels of imaginative play, which helps to properly develop a human brain. They're sitting there in the shallows in front of a screen, not even with evidence-based programming. Little Tommy Tomcat teaching, scratching, fighting, hissing, you know, whatever. We need to be very judicious about what we're allowing our kids to have when they get in front of a screen, because it's not all the same content. And their little brains, they don't learn as well from a screen as through the full experience of interacting with other human beings, interacting with teachers, getting all those nonverbal cues, and learning how to appropriately develop all of that. So don't give your kids the screens. So these are 2 excellent resources. And then what do we do about our schools? Because we know the industry penetrated at the state level for the 21st century classroom. They convinced our state leaders that you have to have all this technology to have a progressive child in the 21st century classroom. Well, guess what? Children do not learn best from screens. So we're not saying get rid of technology, but we need to get back to appropriate technology. We were so honored to hold and host an expert forum here in Massachusetts called Questioning the Safety of Our Children's Exposure to Wireless Radiation in Schools. The videos from that are available free online. We had Dr. Ron Melnick, who designed that $30 million National Toxicology Program study. We had Dr. Martha Herbert, a pediatric neurologist from Harvard, who founded the Autism Lab at Mass General. She sees huge correlations between what's happening to our children and what we know scientifically happens with radiation exposure. We had Theodora Scarato of the Environmental Health Trust. She's the executive director, and they have built an incredible wealth of database information on radio frequency. They've got incredible resources for doctors and schools. We had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, and he now has done his own investigation and is now advocating for safe technology, because what the wireless industry is doing is not safe. He's resigned from all of the technology boards that he served on and said, as soon as you can prove to me that this is safe, give me a call. And his phone has never rang. So he's up in Canada trying to get safe technology through his government as well, but it is a marathon and not a sprint. So for our schools, that's there. We also need to know, New York Times did a wonderful series a year or so ago about what the executives in Silicon Valley are doing, and this is the people who are developing this technology. They're sending their children to schools with no technology. They're making their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. Yet they continue to force this toxic technology onto our children. Maryland, Theodore Scorato at the Environmental Health Trust worked really hard with their Department of Health, and they are the first state-level agency to put out a guidance that suggests that we use hardwired technology in our schools and not expose our children to wireless radiation. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine also gets all these conundrum cases that regular doctors can't figure out. They put a position statement out in 2013 saying our schools should be hardwired and we should not have radiation around the children. United States Collaborative for High Performance Schools is one of those organizations that offers accreditation for having a green school, for having a non-toxic school. And Dr. Toni Antonia Stein, she worked with them to come up with a section on EMFs, or electromagnetic fields, that addresses not only the dirty electricity, which is really toxic to our kids too, but the radio frequency. And so they actually have a chapter on low EMF user practices. So our schools should have this credible information to lead us forward. And then now that all of our kids are studying at home, what makes for a safe environment? Wherever you can, hardwire. There are some guidelines that came out from some of the scientists in Russia, because Russia's been way ahead of us for years. The Russian scientists told us back in 1968 that we were crazy to start deploying radio frequency in the commercial space. So they have some of the top scientists in Russia, and they have just, with COVID-19, released excellent guidelines for studying at home. For example, children should not be in front of screens on end. Any child under 6 should never be using a screen to access their education, and no child should be using a cell phone to access it, because those small screens are really harmful to the eyes. So they also have additional guidelines for children age 6 to 12. A 6-year-old, for example, should only be on for 10 minutes. And at that, they should have a 30-minute break before they go back on again. And then they give guidance like that for all the age levels. Dr. Joel Moskowitz, thank you to him. He has taken those guidelines and posted them out at his website at the University of California at Berkeley. And that's what that link will take you to, is Dr. Moskowitz. So at the municipal level, you are more than welcome to access the presentation that I recently gave to the Ashland Board of Health, and you can access the slides that I used. Again, let's not reinvent the wheel. You're welcome to take what I've used and customize that for your own towns. Here in Burlington, Massachusetts, they have adopted a small cell policy that had Verizon withdraw their 7 small cell applications. They told the vendors, if you come back, if we let you put these small cells in, you have to come back every year. You have to recertify that they're viable, and you have to pay us a fee, because we as a town don't have that expertise, and we want an independent consultant to do this recertification. With that, Verizon withdrew their 7 small cells, and now they're suing the town of Burlington, which was totally expected. But that's how things change. They either change through the legal system, through public policy, or through the public getting educated and not standing for toxins in their environment. So those 3 areas, we've got some great inroads on right now. If you go out to the 5gcrisis.com website, they have an excellent toolkit. They've taken parts of Burlington, they've taken parts of legislation that's come forth, and they've created some templates that you can take right to your town to get a leg up before the industry starts putting this stuff in, and to address it if it has come in. So when I do my work, I try to put myself in the shoes of the person I'm speaking to. So what does it mean to be a municipal leader? What are they hearing from the industry? And how can we provide balanced information for them? So I've created something in my personal research repository that anybody's welcome to go to, a page for municipal leaders to take it from where they are and show them what safe technology looks like and how to counter the messages that they're getting from the industry. So feel free to share that. And then policy at the state level. Granted, we have 20 bills here in Massachusetts. We've had bills here in Massachusetts for over 8 years. And we are still allowing utility smart meters, which transmit for our electrical, our gas, our water, our solar, night and day. They're pulsing this radiation. Let's work with the industry and get them to stop that, hardwire it, or in the interim, just have it pulse once for a monthly reading or if something breaks on the line. Actually, our smart meter bill is advancing in Massachusetts for the first time in 8 years. We also have another bill that would give people the right to know, and that's advancing. We'll see if it survives this session. But in New Hampshire, there was a state representative, Patrick Abrami, who was told about this issue by a constituent. He's an engineer, and he did a deep dive on this and had this major wow moment, like, wow, what are we doing? He crafted a bill. I was introduced. I gave some pointers. They jump in his car from New Hampshire, he and his constituent. They drive down to my kitchen table here in Little Ashland, Massachusetts, and I spent the afternoon helping him to connect the dots. He then beefed up his bill, asked me to come testify. We got Frank Clegg from Canada, the former Microsoft Canada president, Daphne Tackover, who's a lawyer in this area. She introduced the rep to a scientist in Canada, and he drove down. Frank Clegg flew in. I drove up. We all testified along with citizens. We got it through the House Committee on Science, Technology, and Energy. We got it through the Senate Committee, and thankfully on the Senate side, it went to Health and Human Resources, which is chaired by a medical doctor, Tom Sherman, who was also a co-sponsor of the bill. They got it through the House, they got it through the Senate, and then Governor Sununu signed it into law. In the fall, they formed a commission, and they are somebody finally is bringing real non-industry funded scientific experts to educate this commission. And so they have academia, they have legislature, they have people from their Department of Health. And I was nervous about this, but they also have a member of the CTIA, the wireless industry. And that made me really nervous because they have spun things like we know they have done. But finally, they're at the table with the real experts. And so we can have an informed conversation. And then in November, I believe this committee will be reporting out. So that gives our whole country hope. And anybody can take that bill. You can go online and follow the minutes of this commission and see what's happening. So California, it took a lawsuit to get a 9-year suppressed cell phone fact sheet out to the public. Should have been front page news. The media is run by mainstream. It's run by the industry, so we never heard about that. I helped our Department of Public Health in Massachusetts write this fact sheet that has the green heading here. And I was told in 2016 it would be out in 3 months. Has never seen the light of day. Dr. Moskowitz, who sued the California DPH, put in a Freedom of Information Act request here in Massachusetts. He was denied. They wouldn't give it to him. And then he called the Boston Globe. They investigated. They put out an article that questions the safety. In the article, the Department of Public Health here said they would have those fact sheets out within 6 months. Well, within 3 weeks, they put something up on the state website that says there's no direct harm from EMFs. And mind you, we had given them the US National Toxicology Program that shows clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage. And on the heels of that, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy came out with another large-scale study that corroborated everything our US studies. So why did our Department of Public Health put up public guidance that says no harm? So then I went to, and we've been educating the Department of Education here all along. I went to Health and Human Services, which oversees, the Department of Education told me that Health and Human Services oversees the Department of Public Health. So I set up a meeting with members of education, my senator's office, the department, or the Committee on Public Health at the legislature, and an undersecretary at Health and Human Services. So they know about all this. I can't tell you why they're not protecting you, but we need to use our voices and keep that conversation going. Patricia Burke, who I mentioned earlier, let me know that there was a public hearing on the smart meters. She and I and a school teacher who became very ill, a special education teacher, got really sick from radio frequency. We all went in and testified for an entire afternoon for 2 hours. And the Attorney General was there. They had 2 assistant attorney generals there for that hearing. So they know too. And it was ultimately the attorney generals from several states banding together that got big tobacco outed as the toxin that it is. So we're getting close, everybody, but we need everybody's hands-on voice on this. There are also major, we're coming up.
Yeah, well, we've gone fairly well over time, and I do want to, pardon me for interrupting everyone. I do want to leave time for questions. I opened up the chat a couple minutes ago, and I do have several questions. Perhaps you might want to make some
yeah, I'll just whip through this. I'll just show you what's here. The FCC is getting sued left, right, and center because they have failed to look at the non-industry funded science. And I mentioned Burlington's getting sued. There are people down at the Cape who are in a lawsuit because they're trying to turn on a cell tower right next to their home in the church steeple. Keene, New Hampshire has put a moratorium on their 5G build out until this report comes out from the legislature. And if you click on that link with much more, there's a ton of legal stuff going on. So that's exciting. So here's what we have. Bring me in if you'd like. I'll be happy to do these community conversations. You can access Generation Zapped through Canopy. Screenagers has been shown in many of our schools. It addresses the emotional and social and digital addiction thing. So partner up with Generation Zapped wherever Screenagers is being shown in your schools. And then as Ellen mentioned, Judy mentioned, I have built a nonprofit out of the UK. We can train your entire schools in a half an hour. Please go take that little course at Wireless Education. It's less than the cost of a movie ticket. You'll whip through it in about a half an hour. And then you'll know we have that training, that we can do your schools, sliding scale, bulk rate, whatever. We just want to train and help the kids. Okay. So in your community, we've started a group called Massachusetts for Safe Technology. Join us. We do a monthly conference call. Other groups are forming all over the country. You can go out to 5G Crisis and join other groups there, but don't go it alone. I found out the hard way. They'll sweep you right under the rug and they'll tell you you're crazy, right? Get others educated and now you become a force. Stop those small cell installations, and even if it takes you out of your comfort zone, no one's going to fix this for you. So you've got to find the courage to speak up, and we'll be there to help you and hold your hand every step of the way. Speed, reliability, privacy, energy consumption, legal liability, sustainability. Even if they say, well, the law ties our hands, we can't talk about health, there's so many other ways that we need to protect our community. So we know how to do this. All right, thank you. So that's our chat feature, and I'm going to go to the final slide, which just while we do the questions and answers, this is our contact information if you want to get in touch with Dr. Safrir. Her practice is open, so if you have people who you think would benefit from her services, feel free to reach out to Dr. Safrir. Feel free to reach out for me if I can help with anything. And again, Ellen has been so wonderful at the Newton Free Library. They have that acoustimeter on loan, and she's the programming director, so maybe we'll have future programs as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cece, and also to Dr. Safrir. This has been a very, very valuable conversation. I hope all of you have benefited from it. We do have several questions that have come through. One person would like to know, how are families supposed to manage now that the schools are closed and the children having to work on screens? A very, very appropriate question.
That's a very important question. So let's use this as an opportunity to educate, right? First, let's do our best to create safe technology for our children at home so that as they're accessing their education, they're not getting radiated by microwave radiation. Second, let's use this as an opportunity to share those best practices for how a child can study from home in a responsible way. So go to that link and take down that information and start that conversation with your child's teacher, any special aids that your child might have, and then with your school administrators and your school committee. Because by and large, all they've heard is that this technology is great. And now with COVID-19, we are seeing areas in our country where the industry is stepping up and giving more of this wireless technology to look like heroes to help kids in underprivileged areas access their education, but with no safety information. Let's ask the industry, if you're going to give these kids a Chromebook, give them an Ethernet cable and an adapter and let them access it safely.
Thank you so much. I have a very long comment from one of our participants. I will paraphrase. He has, for health reasons, has refused to have a smart meter that measures his water consumption. He has refused to have that installed in his home, and I'm sure with much difficulty, is living without water. They've denied him access to water, even though he has shown evidence from his doctors that he cannot have this smart meter. So on his home, he is asking for us to look at and sign a petition. The address, which I'll put in the chat in a moment, is change.org/MA Smart Meter Choice. It would be very helpful if people would consider signing that.
Yeah, that would be such a kindness. I know I signed that petition because it's just unconscionable. I believe the town I know there is at least one town in Massachusetts, Bridgewater, Massachusetts, that runs its own utility company, and they've been sold by the industry that you have to have this smart infrastructure, so they're forcing it in on our homes. And what kind of a society are we in where you can bring a doctor's note to your town and they're going to say, too bad, we're doing it anyway, and if you don't like it, we're shutting off your water, because that's exactly what's happened. And here we are in COVID-19, our governor, our senators, our state reps, our health agencies are saying, wash your hands. They shut off the water. So please go out and sign that petition. It was very effective. That petition was printed out at the beginning of our legislative session and given to our legislators, and it does make an impact. So petitions can be very effective too.
And I did just put the information in the chat to that petition. Cece did talk about how to contact elected officials and how to move forward in your particular municipality. Someone asked if we will be sharing the PowerPoint slides. We did mention that at the beginning. Yes, we will get them out to the participants. One person in the room has asked, can you put protective fabric over the sources during the night? What if you were in a large residential building that has multiple wireless systems? Is there any way to block this? Can you use curtains? And then someone else also was asking a similar question about living in an apartment building, what to do.
Yeah, those are very valid concerns. I met a woman here in Massachusetts who, I think she's a healthcare provider actually, and she was doing fine, and then all of a sudden her health started tanking. And as what typically happens when our healthcare teams are not trained on this, they run the tests they know to run, they come up empty. So then you find yourself seeking out other providers, paying out of pocket to go see these experts. And then when they can't figure it out, then you're paying out of pocket to go see alternative healers. And now you're tens of thousands of dollars into it till finally somebody says, it looks like your symptoms are from radiation exposure. This woman owned her own condominium, and the utility company had come in and put 7 smart meters on the wall outside of her kitchen, and she got walloped. So she finally figures this out and decides that she's going to try and protect herself inside her condominium, and she buys some paint. There's a carbon black paint you can buy, and she painted the whole side of her condominium with this carbon black paint and then put a pretty color on top of it, thinking that that would block the signal coming in. But she didn't know enough at the time to know that there are people on the other side of her condominium, in their own condominium, that have a decked cordless phone, that have a router, that have an iPad and a tablet. So all this radiation was coming through the opposite wall, hitting that carbon black and bouncing back and walloping her twice. So anytime you decide to employ a product, really make sure you know what you're doing. With the fabric shielding, I've heard that people will do a pretty canopy off their bed and sleep on that all night long, but make sure you're not sleeping on metal springs, because that will invite the radiation. It'll serve like an antenna. But don't take my word on any of this. Engage the experts, work with building biologists or others who can advise you properly, because I'm not an expert in remediation, but go to the Building Biology Institute. Sometimes we get questions about products, like there's this little sticker you can put on your phone. Is that going to protect you? We're all biologically very individual. What might hurt you might not hurt the next person, or it might not hurt you today, but it might hurt you with cumulative exposure by tomorrow. So don't take anybody's word on anything. Measure your own body's bioelectrical responses. And some people, I've met people in the healing energy medical practices who use muscle testing, like chiropractors will often use muscle testing to see if something is strengthening your energy field or shorting you out. So I met a woman who does energy healing, and she will biologically test people with a cell phone in their hand and then without it in their hand, and see, every single one of them shorts out. So removing the exposures is your best first recourse. We have excellent education tools through Generation Zapped, through wireless education, through the healthcare training. So I know it's awkward, but open these conversations with your neighbors. Maybe together you'll all decide. First step, maybe you all put your routers on timers so you all get good sleep at night. Maybe second step is you all hardwire your devices. So education is really the crux of this, and go in it with a very collaborative, kind, open-hearted spirit, because this is legal. The industry has made it legal to radiate you. Most people don't want to know about it, and they will be looking for any excuse not to have to continue this conversation with you. So when we come on strong, we ignite our brain's amygdala, which puts us into that old brain behavior of fight, flight, or freeze. So if we come on too strong, that's where they're going to be going. They're going to be marking the exits to get away from you. So say, hey, I've come across some really important information. Why don't you take a look at it, see what you think, and maybe we can sit down over a cup of coffee and talk about it, right? Because otherwise you risk scaring them off, and then you may never get them back again. So with your schools, with your town, we're all in this together, just like we're all in it together with COVID-19. We're all in this together. So let's be mature adults, come in with kindness and with the facts. Always have the facts at your fingertips. And if you can, have a radiation detection meter, because who would believe this invisible toxin's even there? Seeing is believing, hearing it is believing. So
I do want to follow up, Cece, because I personally work with an energy medicine practitioner, and you were speaking about energy testing. And one technique that I've been taught is to take a stainless steel spoon and simply rub it on the bottom of your foot, if this were my foot, and on the top of your foot, and you can touch it and hold it on your the tips of your toes. And that's a very, very excellent grounding technique that I sometimes actually do after I spent a long day in front of the computer. I go downstairs and I get my spoon, and you could definitely feel the difference. It really pulls you down. I think I'm just going to ask one last question, and then we'll just open it up and let people say thank you and goodbye and so on to each other. And that is, one gentleman has what sounds like a very serious situation, because there's a disagreement in the household, which has caused a rift about protecting the family from wireless devices, to the point where one of the partners has left the household. So do you have any sort of ways to suggest how to really get the message across? I mean, we've just been talking about it for a long time.
Yeah, it's hard. When I first learned this, my family didn't want to hear it. And then I wouldn't stop, and they really didn't want to hear it. But like I mentioned, I was diagnosed with intestinal hyperpermeability, which is that leaky gut syndrome. So I had to take charge of my health. My husband didn't want me to even say those words, leaky gut. He thought it sounded great. So everybody comes at things in a whole different way. But with time, he eventually came around. He'll borrow my meter if he's buying a new car to see what the radiation's like in there. He borrowed it to use it in his home office. Over the leaky gut thing, when he cooked breakfast one day and there wasn't one thing I could eat, I said, really, is that the best level of support? He says, what, do you want me to cook 2 different things? I said, what do you think I've been doing all week, right? So I went back to my functional medicine nutritionist and shared with her that this issue was really hard on our marriage. And she said, that's par for the course when we discover these environmental toxins. Usually one person in the home figures it out. Sometimes it's the dad, oftentimes it's the mom, because they have to be on deck for the kids and they want to do what's right. So it is contentious. But if we try and keep our tempers in check, if we try and come at it with an open heart, then we just have to do what we have to do for ourselves. We be the example. Maybe they'll come along, or maybe that relationship was not meant to last, right? But there's nothing more important than our health. Mental health, certainly, and physical health. So we just have to try and be as diplomatic and kind-hearted as we can, because we've never been in this situation before. We are pioneers in the digital age. And so take charge of what you can control, and, you know, hope and pray that others will open their eyes and listen and look around a little bit at the peer-reviewed independent science and have that aha moment like Rep. Brahmi did in New Hampshire and say, this is not right. What can we do? Who do we need to hold accountable? And how do we get to safe technology?
Well, thank you so much. I do want to say it's been an honor to work with both Judy and Dr. Safrir and Cece. They're very knowledgeable and capable women. I want to thank Dr. Safrir for writing the Cultural Council grant that brought both Cece here to speak with us today, and the fact that the Newton Free Library does have an acoustometer on loan. We do look forward to the day when the library can open and we can reopen our circulation of physical items, books, acoustometers, DVDs, CDs, and so on. We also have a very well-developed virtual programming calendar at newtonfreelibrary.net. You can click on our virtual events calendars. If you have kids at home or teenagers, there are many, many wonderful things happening at the library. We have a virtual makerspace, so we have lots to keep you busy. Watch Generation Zapped using Canopy if you have not done so already. And I really just want to thank everyone for coming. So I'm going to unmute everybody. I wish everybody well in this very challenging time period. I wish you good health and peace of mind.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Let us know if we can help.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
So much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ellen and Judy and Cece. It's something that Green Newton will want to share. It's information that we will share on our e-news bulletin.
Excellent. And I'm happy to go in and give a talk to your group as well if you find that helpful.
Okay, well, we'll definitely share this presentation for starters.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
There'll be a recording of it.
Great. Thank you.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Okay, I'll be ending the meeting now.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.